On the other side of the valley, standing on a cliff edge, was a tall, broad, shrouded man. He was also watching the warlocks below, gripping the hilt of his steel sword sheathed at his left side. But as a light breeze brushed through what dangled free of his bun-tied, chalky brown hair, he looked up and saw the girl dressed in purple crouching on the edge of the cliff opposite him. She didn't notice him, so he watched closely as she stood up, turned around, and began to walk away.
Okay.
He frowned, perplexed. But he didn't think much of it. Could she be with the warlocks? If so, he would deal with her too. As she disappeared, he stood up, ready to jump down, planning to take on the warlocks himself, as he had previously planned. But suddenly, the sound of rushing footsteps from across the valley stopped him. He quickly crouched down again and watched as the girl sprinted to the edge of the cliff and, without hesitation, jumped off. He watched closely as she wielded a shimmering purple-colored sword and held it in front of her as she fell forward. He frowned strangely, confused. Who was she? What was she doing out here, and why was she throwing herself at warlocks?
Katharina remained calm as she fell, silently descending downwards, headed towards the warlocks. She was going to have to be quick, careful, and calm. As she came close to the ground, she used her telekinetic power to slow and soften her landing. She rolled back in mid-air so that her feet were facing forward and crashed into the blue-skinned Master Warlock, stabbing her sword into him. He grunted painfully, a look of startled horror smothering his face as he realized it was too late to react. Once it was embedded in the Master Warlock, Katharina let go of her sword, turned around, and pushed both of her hands forward. Instantly, they glowed a shimmering violet, and a huge blast erupted from them, sending the 3 basic warlocks spinning through the air. She straightened up and pulled a dagger from the holster on her waist, rushing over to each stunned warlock. Quickly, she stabbed them one after the other, ending their lives as her dagger pierced their chests. Easy. No sweat at all. With the warlocks dead, Katharina walked victoriously over to the dead lepus to investigate, a smug look on what was visible of her face. She crouched down and looked at him closely.
What's this guy doing all the way out here?
She frowned, her eyes shifting to his pockets.
I wonder if he has any money.
She muttered, reaching into his trouser pockets. But to her irritancy, the only thing she pulled out was a fistful of herbs and plants. Rolling her eyes, she stared closely at the plants.
An herb collector,
she mumbled.
The city must be near, which means scouts,
she muttered, a hint of caution in her voice as she looked around cautiously.
A fishing herb collector.
She scoffed in confused amusement, looking back at where he had left his goat with a fishing net and bucket. But suddenly, footsteps slammed into the ground behind her. Before she could turn around, the Master Warlock grabbed hold of her throat and held her up off her feet, choking her. She struggled, trying to kick him, trying to pull his hand from her throat, but he was a lot stronger than she was, especially since he had just fed on the Lepus's energy.
You missed.
He grinned as he pulled Katharina's sword from his arm and watched the wound heal. Katharina struggled as he dropped the sword on the ground, still trying to pull him off. How could she have been so stupid? She should have checked to make sure he was dead. But there wasn't time to scold herself. She grunted, trying to use her ethos, but it wouldn't respond to her call. She was beginning to feel weaker, her strength fading as her ability to breathe was denied. The warlock then frowned in realization.
Hold on. You're the one Gahi wants.
He stated as he stared into her shimmering violet eyes.
Maybe I should just kill you here. Save Gahi
The warlock froze before he could finish his sentence, his grin running away from his face. Both he and Katharina looked down at his chest as blood spewed from his mouth. A steel blade had cut through him, missing Katharina by mere inches. The Warlock breathed unsteadily as, from the wound, he began to turn to stone, dying the same way all Warlocks did. Then, the blade was pulled from his chest, and as he hit the floor, his stone body shattered. Katharina fell to her knees as the Warlock's body burst into hundreds of stone pieces. As she hit the ground, she stared down at the corpse, gasping for air, confusion overwhelming her. But who owned the sword that had saved her? Quickly, she looked up. However, before she could set her eyes on the Warlock's killer, she was once again grabbed by her throat. She gasped and grunted in anger as a tall, broad man pinned her down on the ground, glaring into her violet eyes. As her back hit the rock below, she stared up into his deep, black, soulless eyes.
Who are you?
He demanded as he held the tip of his shimmering steel blade to her chest, his accent unlike anything she had heard before.
Why did you kill those warlocks? You're a warlock! You don't kill your own!
He yelled in utter confusion. Katharina struggled but remained silent, trying to break free from him. He quickly grew impatient.
Why are you killing warlocks?
He demanded again, tightening his grip on her throat. Struggling, she glared up at him again, eyeing his chalky brown hair, his almost black eyes. He looked like an average guy to her, and that irritated her more. She scowled.
I am different. If I was like them, I would have killed you by now.
She growled as she grabbed hold of his arm, her hands starting to glow a dim purple color. He frowned in worry.
Hey, what?
Realizing what she was about to do, he backed off and pointed his steel sword at her.
Don't try anything stupid, Warlock. Your power doesn't affect me. I'm...
Still laying on the ground, Katharina held her left hand out and instantly sent him flying through the air with a powerful telekinetic blast. He hit the ground a short distance away and dropped his sword, grunting painfully as Katharina scrambled to her feet. She then yanked her hand back, making him fly back towards her. She watched in amusement, a smile stretching across her face beneath her mask as she watched him roll around the ground as though he was some sort of toy. He grunted, stuttering the word, "Stop," a few times. Katharina wasn't cruel, and so she lowered her hand, watching as he slowly came to a halt a few feet away. And then, as he looked up at her, she glared right back at him. She had no idea who he was, but he had just attacked her, and she wasn't going to let him get his hands on her again. However, the longer she glared at him, the more it seemed as though his glare was one of curiosity and not hostility. Katharina didn't care. She scowled, judging him as he lay there in a simple, dark, pastel purple-colored sweater, muddy jeans, and old leather boots. Who was he? A strange silver pendant was attached to his belt, and it did pique her interest, for all but a few moments. He looked like a blubbering idiot. He hadn't made an attempt to attack her again. He just sat there, looking up at her like he wasn't sure what to do next. Katharina then sighed. She couldn't help but feel some sympathy for the idiot, so she held out her hand, offering to help him up. Staring at her furious face, he slowly frowned in confusion.
You, shouldn't be out here alone,
he said unsurely.
Come on, I'll take you back.
Before he could take her hand, she pulled it away and tutted irritably.
I'm not going anywhere with you, you creep!
She snapped. He scrambled to his feet.
I'm not, Wait, you're a seer, right? How else could your power affect me?
He asked in confusion, staring at her violet eyes. She scoffed in annoyance.
Seer? Seriously? No! I'm a warlock, you dumbass! But deviant. Different.
She added. She wasn't like other warlocks at all, and she'd make sure he knew that before he tried anything stupid again.
But Warlock ethos shouldn't work against me. I don't understand. Your eyes aren't gold.
He frowned. She rolled her shimmering violet eyes. What did he mean? Why did he think Warlock ethos couldn't affect him? Did she care to ask? No. Why would she? Her ethos had clearly just worked on him. Instead, she glared down at him, trying to work out who he might be. He looked to be in his 20s. She could tell just from this short encounter that he was an egotistical dunderhead with a sword who had something to prove, just like any other man. But the fact that he had stopped trying to kill or threaten her had her somewhat intrigued. Why was he asking her questions instead of trying to kill her? She frowned and exhaled deeply.
Who are you, and why did you save me?
She questioned skeptically.
You clearly despise warlocks. I can see it just by looking at you.
She judged, looking him up and down as he straightened himself up. He looked at her strangely.
I saved you because I wanted to kill you myself?
Katharina stepped back as he moved towards her.
If you wanted to kill me, you would have done it as soon as you grabbed me, but you didn't.
He looked down at his feet, seemingly saddened.
I guess, well, if we're being honest here, for a moment, you kinda reminded me of somebody I once knew.
He confessed.
I'm Tsunami.
He greeted, holding out his hand, but Katharina scoffed and slapped his hand away. She ignored his reason and looked away from him.
You're a seer. You dress like they all do.
She said as she looked at his muddy trousers.
But I've never seen one as weird as you before.
She snickered as he frowned.
Where are you from? And why did you think I was a seer just because my powers worked against you?
She asked, her confusion leading her to ask literally everything that was on her mind. He looked at her and gained an irritated scowl.
That's my business. Now you answer me. Why did you kill those warlocks?
He demanded, clenching his fists in anger as his calm attitude exploded into what it had been before she had sent him flying. She deadpanned.
And I thought humans were dumb. Seers are obviously dumber.
She sighed irritably as Tsunami glowered at her. She then scowled up at him.
As I told you, I'm what the humans call a deviant, a unique or abnormal version of a species. I'm free of warlock compulsion, and they can't control me. If you can't understand that, it basically means my mind is my own.
She said rudely.
That also must be why my ethos worked against you.
I don't believe you.
He growled instantly as he held out his hand. His sword flew over to him telekinetically, and as he gripped the hilt with his right hand, he pointed it at her, his brown hair floating around aggressively from the force of his arriving weapon.
Tell me the truth, warlock scum.
She made no attempt to obtain her weapon. She frowned slightly and stared at his steel blade, a familiar feeling of hopelessness suddenly consuming her. That darn sadness. It always hit her at the worst times, and whenever it did, she lost all focus on her task, on her situation. She sighed despondently, glancing up at his black, empty eyes.
If you're gonna kill me, just do it. It would be better to die now than keep running for my entire life.
She mumbled, trying to battle the sadness that had suddenly enthralled her. He slightly lowered his sword and looked at her.
What do you mean?
Katharina took a deep breath and felt no remorse, no need to hold back what she was thinking. Her near defeat had to be the trigger for her sadness, she thought, and it was something she knew she couldn't escape. She shrugged and looked down at the ground.
I have been running for nearly 2 years now.
From whom? Humans?
She shook her head.
Warlocks.
She mumbled, noticing a tear in her mask as she dragged her hand over her face.
I'm an outcast. I escaped the kingdom when Gahi realized I was in self-control.
She explained, pulling her mask off as she lowered her hood.
I was chased from my home. And not only that, I left behind the only person I have ever trusted.
She said sadly.
Tsunami frowned, evaluating both her answer and the saddened expression on her face. He wasn't quite yet sure how to feel, but he felt no need to attack or threaten her again. For some reason, she seemed familiar, even more so now that she had revealed her face. He had never seen her before, but something about her, it was almost captivating in a familiar way. As a light breeze then floated by, stopping the girl from pulling her hood back over her head, her magenta-red hair started to float gently in the breeze. It caught Tsunami in a bewildered gaze as he stared at her. The combination of her saddened expression and floating hair enthralling him into some kind of bedazzled trance. Her violet eyes sparkled like stars, her soft skin glowing in the sunlight. She looked beautiful, unlike anything he had ever seen, like a fantasy. Was she real? Snapping out of it, he shook his head and placed his sword back in its scabbard. He then slowly moved closer to her.
I'm an outcast too, you know? But I wasn't chased from my home. It was stolen from me.
He said slowly, trying to keep the somewhat calm atmosphere alive.
As he confessed, Katharina looked at him.
So, you've got no home to go back to?
She asked, the distraction from her own sadness a much-wanted invitation. He shook his head.
No. But I found my way out here. I've made a new life. Why haven't you done the same?
He asked.
I mean, if you escaped someone like Gahi, shouldn't you be laying low? Trying to blend in somewhere rather than killing more of his warlocks?
She shrugged.
Killing warlocks is what I'm best at.
She sighed.
And I do have a life. I kill warlocks and undertake hunter contracts here and there.
She added.
I travel city to city, town to town seeking work.
She explained. But then, she frowned irritably.
But wherever I go, the warlocks always find me. I can never stay anywhere for too long. No, I'm better off like I am, always moving.
She explained, a despondent look on her face.
Tsunami stared at her, thinking. For some reason, that strange sense of familiarity remained, growing stronger as each moment passed. Like she reminded him of someone so much it was like she was that someone. He picked up her sword from the ground and handed it to her.
What kind of work?
He asked, his curiosity consuming him. He didn't trust her, and he wouldn't deny that he still felt a need to kill her. She was a warlock, humanity's greatest enemy. Why should he let her live? He couldn't understand why, but something within him was telling him to allow her a chance to explain herself. He glared at her, waiting for her answer, trying to hide the fact that he had no intention to harm her, despite their differences. She took her sword and sheathed it.
A city close to here. I caught word that they're having trouble with a werewolf, and the pay is pretty good. I need the money. I barely have any food left.
She mumbled. He frowned in confusion.
Food. Warlocks don't eat food. You feed off the energy of living things, right?
She shook her head.
That's what makes me different, I guess. I don't have to feed off the energy of other living things. Anyway, I'm wasting time. Are you gonna kill me or what? If not, get out of my way.
The girl then snapped back to her aggressive self.
Hey, wait!
He insisted as she went to walk away.
I've never come across a warlock like you before. In fact, I've never seen a female warlock. What's your name? You have got one, right?
She scoffed and tried to walk past him again, but he stepped in front of her.
Get out of the damn way, you idiot!
She yelled.
Then answer me! Who knows, maybe we can help each other.
He suggested.
I don't need your help!
She yelled angrily, somewhat scaring Tsunami, who backed out of her way. Tsunami watched as she walked over to the river and pulled a flask from her belt. She knelt down a few feet away from the goat and started to fill her flask with water. He slowly crept over and leaned over her, watching as she filled the flask.
So, did they bully you or something?
He asked.
The other warlocks?
Katharina scowled irritably. She really hated this guy. Why was he still here? She swung her arm back and crashed it into Tsunami's shin.
Ow!
He yelped and hopped around in pain as she continued filling her flask. Once it was full, she attached it back to her belt and stood up, walking past Tsunami as he continued to hop around in agony. But as she started preparing to leave, he scurried over to her like a desperate child.
Where are you going?
He asked frantically. She ignored him.
Nigrad by any chance? That's where I'm from.
He smiled.
That's the closest city to here.
Still walking away, she continued to ignore him. He quickly grew impatient. He reached out and grabbed her shoulder.
Hey!
She swung around, pulling her blade from its sheath. She pointed it at him and scowled with hostility.
Don't touch me!
She yelled. Holding up his hands in surrender, he laughed nervously.
Look, I guess I'm imposing a little, but...
A little?
She exclaimed.
You've asked more questions in the space of 5 minutes than I've ever been asked in my entire life.
Still holding up his hands, he sighed.
Just tell me one thing. Are you still aligned with Gahi or not?
Sighing irritably, she shook her head.
No! I want to fight back against Gahi.
She answered honestly.
After hearing her statement, something within him sparked. This girl, no, this Warlock, she was nothing like any other Warlock he had confronted before. Not only was she showing emotion, but she shared the same kind of hatred for the man he was planning to one day find and make pay for his crimes. The fact that she was a Warlock still had him unsettled, but something about her made him want to get closer, to find out more. But she didn't seem like the type to so openly go with him or assist him. If he was to find out more about her and try to befriend her, he'd need to make sure he said all the right things. But would she accept what he was planning to offer? He looked at her, staring into her violet eyes.
I want to fight back against him too.
Yeah, along with literally every other human and seer in Alvengard.
She scoffed.
Just listen, please.
He asked calmly. She glared up at him, waiting. He took a deep breath and sighed.
Gahi took everything I ever loved. And pretty much everyone back in my city is too afraid to even say his name. I don't know what he did to you, but you're clearly not afraid. If there's one thing I know about him, it's that it's going to take more than myself to take him down.
Still glaring at him, the girl tapped her foot impatiently.
So, I guess what I'm saying is, well...
Realizing what he was about to say, Katharina scoffed.
What? Are you about to suggest that we team up? Warlock and Seer against the most powerful man in the entire continent, maybe the entire realm? Are you nuts?
Oh, like you'd have a chance on your own?
He yelled harshly. She scoffed and sheathed her blade.
Says the guy that just had his ass handed to him by a girl.
Embarrassed, Tsunami stood there like a dog with his tail between his legs as Katharina turned her back to him. She whistled loudly, and as the sound of approaching hooves echoed, Tsunami shook his head, running over to her again.
Wait, where are you going?
He asked. Katharina ignored him. She stared ahead as Spirit appeared in the distance, hurrying over to where she was waiting. As the unicorn reached them, startling the seer, Katharina looked back at him.
The further away from you, the better.
She grumbled. As she climbed atop the unicorn, Tsunami pouted.
So, you're just gonna leave?
She deadpanned as she looked down at him.
Yup.
Then, before he could say anything else, she tapped the unicorn's side. Spirit neighed loudly and sped off, kicking dirt into Tsunami's astounded face. He stood there, watching as Katharina vanished into the distance, leaving him alone. She scowled, getting further and further away. She felt confused. She didn't care why that seer hadn't killed her. She was just glad to have gotten away with her life. Now, she would head for Niagrad and finish the last contract she had on her list. After that, she'd have enough money to finally leave this ugly, war-scorned country. As she approached a forest of dead trees, she focused on her journey, forgetting all about that ugly, brown-haired man. She had more important things to do than think about him.
Not too far from where the shattered stone corpses of the warlocks Katharina had slain lay, a stag-masked, man-like figure of at least 6'5" stood behind the cover of a towering tree. He lingered in the darkness of the shadows cast by the mountains, his eyes glistening a fiery orange through the black of the mask's eye sockets. The darkness he stood within quaked in his presence, the bark of the tree he stood against cracking quietly as he dug his claw-like nails into it. His position hadn't been detected by the girl or the seer. He glanced out at Tsunami as he stood there, watching Katharina leave. After a few moments, the masked man stood up straight and held his right middle and index fingers in front of his stag skull-shaped mask.
She's heading north,
he muttered, his voice deep, cold, and accented differently to both Tsunami and Katharina. He leaned to the side, looking out at the seer again. With his fiery orange eyes, he watched as Tsunami started walking in the direction that the girl had gone, muttering to himself as he kicked up the dirt beneath him. Standing straight again, the masked man gripped the tree behind him with his left hand, his sharp, claw-like nails digging deeper into the bark.
Some piece of shit seer is following her.
He growled, anger in his once emotionless voice.
Permission to gut the
Maintain your distance.
Came a distorted voice within his mind.
Keep an eye on the target and do not get distracted. You cannot approach her or reveal yourself yet. It is too dangerous.
Whatever.
The masked man grumbled, unwilling to challenge his orders.
Regroup with the others and stay on task.
She's killed the others.
He grumbled, but with amusement in his voice.
Then report back and don't falter. Time is of the essence.
Lowering his hand, the masked man moved away from the tree and disappeared into the darkness without a single sound, almost as if he hadn't been there at all.